welcome to the session, a thematic presentation on key sustainability challenges, drivers of chemical industry. The presentation is going to be made by Mr. JAYDEEP SATHAYE, Partner Lead of ERM India. JAYDEEP SATHAYE is the lead partner for ERM India and is based in Gurugram. He has 25 plus years of environmental consulting experience for business and government. ERM celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2021. ERM India was established in 1995 and since that time has both responded to and pushed the sustainability agenda in India. ERM plays an important role in developing and implementing a unified boots to boardroom sustainability strategy and plan. ERM covers the emerging areas as well as the less prominent but equally important topics of product sustainability, biodiversity, safety, compliance, and resource circularity and more. The ICC Sustainability Conclave, right from its beginning in 2019, ERM has been a partner of the conclave with ICC. Mr. Sathaye, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, and good afternoon to ladies and gentlemen, members and non-members of ICC. The morning session has set me up very nicely because the things that I'm going to present are extremely relevant and coherent. We heard about net zero, decarbonization, biodiversity, and a whole myriad of subjects relevant to the chemical sector. A little bit about ERM. Our purpose is to shape a sustainable future with the world's leading organizations, and we're present in 50 plus countries or 40 plus countries, 7,500 people worldwide. And in India, we're present in 5 offices with about 125 of us. So what the morning session, a number of speakers alluded to directly or indirectly is that the business performance is very closely intertwined now with ESG performance and sustainability performance of any company. So carbon neutrality and ESG performance are board level priorities now, and they require a robust strategy, a dynamic roadmap because change is the only constant, as they say, and requires new capabilities to succeed in the coming years. So for context, just a few days ago we heard the Indian delegation, the Minister of Environment and Forests and Climate Change lay out India's long-term low-carbon development pathway for India. That includes a lot of renewable energies, of course, but also green hydrogen, biofuels, nuclear energy, and so on. A lot of this transition or low-carbon development that India has planned is very relevant to the chemical sector because there are massive opportunities for the sector in this space going ahead. So for a company, for a country, and therefore for companies to achieve a credible net zero journey requires setting the ambition at first. So understanding the baseline emissions, business as usual forecast, what would the emissions increase over in a business as usual scenario, and then planning a journey towards net zero. What are the material or the low hanging fruit that can be targeted to reduce emissions, and then communicate or disclose that journey or the strategy as well as the timeline. So I'm sure you've heard all of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, the SBTi. That is one of the few frameworks in the world that looks at an absolute reduction in emissions, not removal or offsetting, but rather an absolute reduction in emissions to net zero, towards net zero. That can be achieved based on their calculation by reducing, let's say, a 4.2% reduction year on year on scope 1 and 2 emissions to reach net zero by 2050. and a 2.5% per year reduction in Scope 3 emissions to reach net zero, or close to net zero, by that time. And with this sort of approach, a 90% overall reduction is possible by 2050. Now, there are only about 113 chemical companies, as I understand, that have signed up for the SBTi in various stages, of which 9 are in India. So, which is it's a very credible engagement with the SBTi and shows real engagement with the net zero journey. So, the residual 10% will need to be looked at by direct capture, carbon capture utilization, or investing in nature-based solutions. Again, that is something, nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions or nature-positive solutions, variously known with some distinction between them. But this is the path forward for residual emissions. So in the chemical sector, here you can see many of the world's biggest chemical companies and their Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So the key upstream emissions are shown in the orange or yellow text. Probably it's too small to see. But the bottom pie chart is what's relevant, really. You can see that for most companies, a minimum of 75% of their emissions or more, minimum 75%, are Scope 3. That means they're not directly in their control. And it's this Scope 3, these Scope 3 emissions are the ones that need to be calculated and mitigated for or reduced to go towards net zero. So no net zero target is obviously met without considering the Scope 3, which is sort of the biggest elephant in the room, so to speak. So how does a company completely decarbonize operations and the value chain? On the left-hand side, you'd see reducing emissions from the operations today. That's sort of the short-term actions that companies can take. So reviewing greenhouse gas inventory and then identifying the hotspots, projecting future emissions, and then planning, using that information to assess initial or low-hanging, quick and easy and relatively inexpensive options to reduce GHG emissions. This could mean energy efficiency or plugging fugitive emissions or changing fuel types and so on, or transitioning to a new fuel type. And then finally prioritizing for the medium term and longer term, prioritizing the preferred technology options as well as developing implementation plans. The middle box there is what companies should be considering from a medium-term perspective. There's a whole bouquet of low carbon or zero carbon technologies that are available. We've shown just a few of them. Again, I realize it's hard to see, but there's a whole options from renewables, moving to renewables, changing fuel type, going to bio-based fuels, nature-based solutions, direct carbon capture, and so on. So all of these maximize emissions savings for the business today, if that's planned well. Selecting the new low-carbon technologies and products, deploying these options on the ground, maybe through pilots, but aggressive pilots, because the time to develop and implement that cycle is getting shorter and shorter, because there's pressure on companies and from the investors, which we've found. That's our experience worldwide. There's a lot of, Mr. Kapoor alluded to in the morning. There's investor pressure on companies to decarbonize or show credible plans to decarbonize by a certain date. So in the longer term, there are market solutions to procure low-carbon products and services, and companies themselves modify their approach or the entire business model to become low-carbon, to look at low-carbon feedstocks. Again, that was something that was alluded to in the earlier session in the morning. Green chemistry, generalizing, to use that term loosely. And understanding the markets within India as well as where Indian chemical companies' customers are, which is most of them are in Europe and North America, or the bulk in terms of revenue are in those two continents. So And again, in the longer term, compensating for residual of emissions by using offsets. So there are two strategic imperatives in our view that a company, that any company has today. One, obviously, is to drive profitable revenue growth. So the shareholder value and all of those investors, return on to investors, shareholder value, all of those are obviously drivers. But today it's also making business, the business model itself more sustainable and in fact integrated with the business with the financial performance of a company. So in other words, again, broadly called ESG or sustainable performance. So these two pillars require four things: a strategy from the boardroom to the shop floor and beyond, as our tagline over here says, from boardrooms to community. So the boundaries of a company's operation do not stop at the fence line or the boundaries of the asset, but in the community surrounding. So a strategy has to be devised which integrates the business performance and sustainability performance, which means climate change impacts, the transition to low fuels, impact on biodiversity, communities, safety, and so on. Having that strategy and then scaling up the sustainability and decarbonization in operations, rethinking business models, rethinking products that are coming, that will become relevant in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, and starting the transition or the research in those areas, collaborating across sectors. We're not confined to working within just the chemical sector, but we're seeing, for example, the energy companies now supporting biofuels or helping the steel sector decarbonize. Similarly, the chemical sector is going to have a massive, massive role to play in the transition to electric mobility, to carbon capture, to reimagining, changing completely the agribusiness, the agrichem, the agricultural sector. Again, that sector is going to be affected by climate change, and in turn will affect climate change, and there's a lot of opportunity for the chemical sector in that space. So these, finally adjusting the business performance to in line with the physical assets. Where are the physical assets located? What is the risk to them? Will we have stranded assets because of the transition to low carbon fuels that are going to be used, or will some products become obsolete because there's regulatory pressure or stakeholder or consumer pressures that reduce their consumption? Or if they're being exported to Europe, for example, will there be a trade barrier? For example, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, a carbon tax essentially for products that enter Europe. So looking at all of these things enables value creation through the entire supply chain for investors, the community, regulators, the employees of the company, and all other stakeholders. So some practical considerations here. Again, on the left-hand pillar, building climate resilience. That's something that companies are required to do to understand the impact of climate change or climate risk on their portfolio, on their physical portfolio. So understanding, for example, the water vulnerability. And in India, I read there's a report out, I believe, by the CEEW that projected that more than 75% of India's districts over the next few years will flip over from, so for example, where there was a drought or where there was water scarcity, they will become flood-prone districts, and the other way around. Districts that were flood-prone will become drought-prone. And that's where more than 75% of India's population lives. That's where most of the industry is concentrated. So understanding the risk from physical risk of climate change to assets is very important for the sector. And with that, climate change impact also has socio-economic impacts. Who are the communities surrounding the assets? How will it impact the community? How will it impact employees? The safety, heat stresses, for example, as we know, are reducing productivity. They're increasing health issues. Similarly, there are opportunities to leverage existing products and develop new ones. That all these need to be looked at from a shorter term. Energy efficiency, low carbon fuels and feedstocks, circularity, these are all, I'd say they're already here, but they're rapidly progressing in terms of their importance in the value chain in the chemical sector. So the use of digital tools, digital technologies, tech enablement of functions of safety, for example, or a dashboard, for example, that looks at compliance, regulatory risk, when permits are getting, are expiring, new regulations that may be coming, sort of crystal ball gazing, all of that can be enabled using digital tools and technology. Product stewardship, again, for companies from India that are exporting to the Western economies, or even Korea for that matter. There are several countries that have their own rules. We are awaiting India's similar rules that will apply to companies that import substances into India. All of these, the aim of all of these is to build circularity, make them safer, less toxic, and so on. So all of these need to be looked at by a business. And finally, in the slightly longer term, electrification, hydrogen, carbon capture, all of these technologies will be major drivers for the chemical sector in the future. In addition to the basic chemicals, agrochemicals, a lot of the sort of growth in the sector is going to come from electrification, hydrogen, the sort of transformation of mobility, electric vehicles, aircraft, the materials that are used in that to make them lightweight, make them more recyclable for end of life, all of that. So this is something that's a massive, all these areas are massive opportunities for the sector. So there are 7 steps in our view that the sector can implement. And very briefly, number one is to reevaluate your product portfolio. What are the products that are going to get obsolete or will have regulatory barriers or trade barriers? And what are the products that you should be investing in or doing for tomorrow or the years to come? Shifting to circular assets from so looking at capital investment from that point of view, instead of having stranded assets, looking at what can you substitute virgin materials? Can you substitute recycled materials instead of for virgin materials? Or in terms of circular capabilities, when you decide to make a major capital expense, or can you instead repurpose an existing asset or retire a part of an asset? And how do you do that safely? All that is part of the circular consideration. Reorganizing the entire business, consider setting up separate companies that are focused on the circular economy. And because then the time to market in those focused smaller companies, you accelerate that rather than having the legacy issues that a large corporation might have. So, as I've said, there's a lot of opportunities in the sector, and it's important for the leading companies to seize those opportunities from brand owners. Brand owners have made commitments to decarbonize or to have a certain ESG performance or to be first among equals with their peers and so on. So there's a lot of opportunity for cross-value chain collaboration, cooperation, and also cross-sector. So the silos between industrial sectors are really sort of breaking down today, because it really will take, no single sector or company has the answer. There a lot of collaboration, cooperation between industries and government and think tanks and research organizations is required. Number 6, redefining and testing business models. Again, doing this rapidly. So to pressure test something, do pilot studies, accelerate the time to get to market. If it doesn't work, drop it, modify it, try something new. All of those are the business imperatives today. And finally, without building trust with all stakeholders, including the public, the communities, or the client or the customers, it's sort of a company, however, no matter how good its performance is, if it doesn't communicate and gain the trust or disclose. When I say communicate, I mean disclose publicly its performance, ESG performance, sustainability performance, and its plans to improve on that performance. You won't gain the trust of consumers. So these 7 items, in our view, are critical for companies to focus on in the coming years. So to summarize, we see these 4 pillars, integrating innovation into sustainability and integrating sustainability into business. This is a sort of a basic requirement today. We're seeing this more and more in companies in India, as well as all over the world. The second pillar is portfolio transformation, looking at opportunities in the coming years, what products, what lifestyle changes are being driven by climate change, by what consumption changes are being driven by climate change. How does the sector capitalize on that? How does it respond to grow in that scenario? Supply chain issues, supply chain sustainability, whether it's compliance with regulations, whether it's understanding the impact of climate change on the supply chain, or the safety performance, or handling environmental liabilities of the supply chain. All these are very key concerns. The impact on biodiversity of the supply chain, all more and more relevant and important and central to the conversation around sustainability of a corporate's performance. And finally, the digitalization is sort of an underpinning backbone for all of any company. I mean, whether it's making any process more efficient, understanding where the leakages are in real time, looking at compliance. There's a myriad of opportunities and functions that the digitalization and digital technology can help in. That if these 4 pillars or four themes are acted upon, understood and acted upon by the businesses, then I think these enable a company to become the industry leader. Thank you.
Thank you, JAYDEEP, for taking us through this journey. I'm sure people have questions, but given that we are overrunning time, I think discussions you can directly talk to JAYDEEP bilaterally.
Sure. I have a few colleagues also in the conference, so yes, we can definitely speak.
JAYDEEP has a few colleagues. One of his colleagues has also flown in from Bangkok, who's here. And as a token of our appreciation, I would request Dr. Rakesh Kumar to kindly hand over a memento.